Hi, this is Ken Berry. You're listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson along with Tony Figueroa and Donna Allen in an encore edition of This Week in TV History. This particular segment originally aired in February 2015. Tony?
All right, so let's go to February 15th, 1960. It's an episode of the Danny Thomas Show, or Make Room for Daddy. And in this episode, Danny meets Andy Griffith, or Andy Taylor, while they're driving from New York to Florida. They get stopped in a town called Mayberry, North Carolina. And Danny is basically brought in for running a stop sign. This was the start of something big, let's just say.
That episode of Make Room for Daddy. You have Andy Griffith and Danny Thomas, who I think of, looking back all these years, are both good guys.
Yeah.
And they're pitted against each other.
Yeah.
And the episode is brilliant. I mean...
And it's the Andy Griffith from his No Time for Sergeants.
Yeah, this was
era, more from his comedy album era, where what it was
football. And if you have not heard that, it's out there on CD.
That little pumpkin.
To hear him tell the story of Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
And you do see that in season 1 of the Andy Griffith. You see a lot more. One of my favorite moments of Andy of that early era is him telling Opie about the revolution and making American history exciting, because it wasn't in the classroom. And I mean, I think it speaks volumes there that, you can't just throw stats and you're not going to hold attention to adults, let alone kids. But, when he tells that, and makes it exciting and puts the inflection there. I mean, so yeah, it was closer to this Andy. Also, it was, this is a backdoor pilot. Mm-hmm. And it is a wonderful example of what a pilot should be. I think there's only a handful of really good pilots.
And for those listening who may not be familiar with the term, backdoor pilot is a pilot that's not necessarily intended as a pilot. It airs either as an episode of a running show or back in the days of the movie of the week, it aired as a segment of the movie of the week. But it had all the trappings of the pilot so that if it went well, they might take it and develop it into a series. And if it didn't catch on, you still got a running production.
With this one, Danny is prominent throughout the show. A lot of backdoor pilots. Right. The lead might
disappear.
Might disappear. Right. They might be in the beginning, at the end, and it centers around guest stars, and that is kind of the setup that you might have. It's very economical that way because it's in the production budget of an already existing show. And if people love the character, great. If they don't love the character enough to give them their own show, they might have a great reoccurring character. And sometimes you have both. Mm-hmm. The spinoff doesn't work, but you still see those characters again because you like them. Let's see. But anyway, so we have Danny heading to Florida and get stopped. And the thing is, he's in the jail now. Since the Danny Thomas Show was a 3-camera show, it looks a lot different than what we would know as the Andy Griffith Show. But he's in the jail, and it is a stalemate between Andy and Danny. Andy, of course, is the sheriff, the justice of the peace, and the editor of the local paper. So, some things did change. But you have every walk of Mayberry life walking into the sheriff's office in this episode. The town drunk. Frances Bavier was not playing Aunt Bee. There was a different character, but she played a town widow who was being, let's say, screwed over by the villain, kind of the boss hog of the guy who owns everything, because her husband was never a successful man, but she wanted him to, look good when he was being buried, and she buried him in a rented suit. And of course, the guy who rented the suit was still collecting payments over and over and getting very aggressive on collecting the payments, even though she had paid 3 times what the suit was already worth and still collecting, and he saw this as pure profit. And eventually Andy had to kind of, come up with a Solomaic solution for this problem. But Danny is seeing who he is. He thinks he's just some sort of small town huckster who's trying to cheat the city person that's passing through, knowing that they're not going to stick around to see the judge or pay the fine or anything like that, which does exist. And he does see that there is a human side to this. Andy wins out at the end,
of course,
because Danny's being a jerk. But it's great to see basically two different schools of comedy paying off of each other.
And it's actually a good combination.
It's a good combination with those. It's a shame that Danny Williams never returned to Mayberry at any time. But the show happened. You got some of the basics. You saw the character that would inspire Otis, and Ron Howard did play Opie in this. He was one of the few that went over there.
We're talking about the origins of the Andy Griffith Show, the pilot of which originally aired during This Week in TV History as part of the Danny Thomas Show. And of course, the commonality between the two shows, the show that eventually evolved into the Andy Griffith Show, would be Sheldon Leonard.
Yes, that is true. The partner that Danny Thomas had. It is also, you look at this because, a lot of people will credit Andy Griffith to really add the rural element to the situation comedy on network, and then the Hillbillies, Medical Junction, Green Acres, all of that, until, CBS decided, we don't want to be this. Yep. And so, you really see that this is the start of something that is bigger than all of its parts together. Don Knotts had done No Time for Sergeants with Andy Griffith. When he saw the Danny Thomas show, calls up Andy and says, "You need a deputy?" And they realize, Andy does need somebody to work off of. And when we talked about, kind of the storytelling aspect that Andy had, the homespun depiction of things, that was prominent very early on.
And again,
that faded.
It shows not only what a shrewd guy Andy Griffith was, but what a generous performer he was.
He was with Don Knotts.
Yeah. He basically morphed Andy into the straight man.
Yes.
Of the show.
I would say that's very, very generous, and I think he probably took some of Jack Benny's philosophy. Doesn't matter who gets so many laughs, name's on the show.
That's right. I still have a job next week.
Exactly. Jack Benny also was a wonderful straight man who could get the laughs by saying nothing. And Andy,
or Bob Newhart, the same.
Bob Newhart could do that as well. Andy had that, but instead of being the comic relief, he was playing straight man and let Don Knotts play for the laughs. And not only was Don Knotts laugh out loud funny with some of the scenes that he did as Barney, some of the bits that Andy would never be able to pull off, because you knew Andy was smarter than that. We were talking about Andy being very generous and giving a lot of the laughs to Don Knotts. Also, I find that, just as a performer and somebody who has played comic relief and has played straight man, you if you've done that, you really do appreciate what he did. Being generous and also being the straight man is the harder of the two jobs, especially when you're working with somebody like Don Knotts or somebody who, like Bud Abbott working with Lou Costello. The fact that you could play straight. If you're on camera, you could always go cut. If somebody is just being so funny that you can't control it. But when you're doing this on stage, you can't yell, cut. When you have the teams, usually the straight man is better paid, or at least in the days of vaudeville burlesque, because it was considered the more difficult.
It is.
And usually to play straight man requires a certain amount of acting skill.
And technique.
Pacing, timing, and often is underrated because, you're working in comedy still, and people don't realize that how good an actor somebody who is playing straight man to the comedy is. I think Donna noticed it one time. We're watching Sanford and Son, and you really need to appreciate DeMond Wilson's skills as an actor working off of Red Fox.
And usually your straight man never gets the accolades.
Yeah.
Yes.
Never. Harder job, less attention.
The other thing, which I think is so important with what Andy created, he had said it many times. A lot of times I think he, just to be nostalgic or to be humble, or he said, the main ingredient was love. which, when you're taking technical notes on something like that is not always helpful. But he had said, we have these characters, and not all of them are the most sophisticated. They might not be, the most educated, but they're not dumb. No. They might be naive, but they're not dumb. And he said we had many opportunities to put in a joke that made them look dumb, or we would have to drop their IQ points so far. But these characters had integrity, and if any of the jokes hurt the integrity of the character, no matter how funny they were, we had to throw them out because the integrity of these characters were much more important. And, we're talking 1960. Within a few years, it's like so many shows just threw any sort of sense of that out the window, and sometimes I think it hurt the overall.
Well, it cheapened the product.
Yeah, exactly. It cheapened. That's the best way of putting it. It cheapened the product.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
One more item. Are you starting a company in an emerging market or developing something new? Do you have intellectual property but aren't sure how to protect it? Reach out to our friends at Tectonic Law. They offer rock-solid representation for groundbreaking industries who need help capturing and protecting their full portfolio of intellectual property and intangible assets, including trademark rights, brand assets, copyright rights, publicity rights, and privacy rights. Tectonic Law streamlines the complex intricacies of intellectual property and business law in easy-to-understand terms that will help you and your company form a concrete plan of action to secure and protect the value of your brand and your creative work product. Tectonic Law is licensed to practice throughout the state of California. They also practice before such tribunals as the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Go to tectoniclaw.com, tectoniclaw.com, to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
I'm really James Best. Listen, you know what you're doing? You're listening to TV Confidential. If you don't, I'll cuff you and stuff your feet, and I'm not kidding.
We've talked about this before. There is nothing inherently interesting about watching a dumb character. You want to give, especially if it's your hero,
yes.
You want to give, whether it's an Andy Williams, a Danny Williams, Andy Taylor situation, or a Jim Rockford, whoever he's up against situation. You want to give the opponent. You want to make the opponent worthy of the protagonist. Yes. So. Because there's no joy, there's no satisfaction in beating a stick figure. So you want, again, it goes back to just drama 101. And you want to make the character interesting. And you want to engage you want to keep giving the viewer reason to come back week in and week out. So the supporting characters, you want to make them. You don't want to make fun of them. You want them to appeal to the reader so that they do come back week in, week out.
Yeah, and it is amazing. You look at Gilligan in one episode, he's the smartest guy in the room. In another episode, he can't add 2 and 2. He literally can't add 2 and 2.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how dumb they want him to be. Literacy drops within these characters. That happened with Maxwell Smart, Herman Munster,
Howard Gordon.
Exactly.
Howard Gordon started off from someone who just sort of was on perpetual jet lag. They made him dumber as this series.
Yeah, and Colonel Klink and Sergeant Schultz got dumber as the show went on until the point where the viewers are feeling, I don't want to say sympathetic for those two characters, but it eventually became, oh, wow, this is the stupid German show. Yeah. And or they're going, they weren't that dumb.
Yeah.
But sometimes for one of the plans to play out properly or to be successful had to do with the stupidity of the person that they were working off of. And I think, no, you got to rethink the plan. Don't drop the IQ point, especially of a reoccurring character. MASH, I think, also was getting that way with Frank Burns
right.
sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, you cannot have anybody in this position that is a total incompetent. They have to have some redeeming value.
Frank Burns was slowly going insane, though. But I digress.
Yeah. But that's he
was the only character on that show who was never allowed to grow.
And I think he left at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he
Well, no, Linfield's gone on record as saying, I've done everything I could do with it.
Yeah.
And you're right, he did leave at the right time.
He left at the right time. He left on a note. I'm glad that when he left, he had the last word.
Yeah, he got promoted.
Yeah.
He got promoted once.
And, it is because, I think he had a good send-off.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was the start of something really big, and I'm always looking at people like Danny Thomas, Sheldon Leonard, Andy Griffith, Carl Reiner. These are the people who really got things started with television comedy that everybody else followed. And sometimes, let's just say that, you might have somebody down the line who ignores, the commandments set by these guys, and they come and go. Unfortunately, somebody sees that person as their hero, and then you see cyclical crap that shows up on the airways every now and then. But I think these guys had certain fundamentals. Sometimes people will say something like, well, they were, they're successful because they're clean. It's like, they're clean because they had to be.
Yeah.
And they're clean because the characters would not say certain things because that was not part of the character, the time, the place.
Right, and it wasn't idealized.
It wasn't
portrait.
idealized, yeah. And it wasn't that, somebody with a high moral high ground, would say, you can't do this. It was a different time, and that if you saw Andy 10 years earlier in the Army, he probably did tell a dirty joke, but you never see that.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that, it's, and you can't judge the standards and practices of 1960 by today, anyway.
The Andy Griffith Show may not be one of my favorite TV shows, but I respect the show because the show always kept its integrity.
And going back to something we said a few weeks ago, even, and this is easy to forget, even when Andy decided, okay, I've had enough after 8 years.
Yes.
He was shrewd enough to put in place a successful spin-off with Ken Berry that lasted another 3 years, which kept all the cast members on that show employed for another 3 years, and all the crew member employed for another 3 years.
Yeah, Mayberry RFD.
Yeah.
He also groomed his successor. It's not like he said, I'm done, and the network said, no, we want to keep this machine going. Yeah. No, he was grooming a successor, unbeknownst to Ken Berry at the time. Also, Ken Berry, very different from what he just came off of, which was F Troop.
I saw some of the early episodes of that. I didn't realize what a physical comedy was.
The physical comedy of Ken Berry is amazing. Yeah. Some of the sight gags that he did that would be not just one pratfall, a succession of various pratfalls. Him just walking out of his office into the middle of Fort Courage, avoiding getting hit by this, tripping over a bale of hay because he's walking and reading a book or something. Just brilliant stuff, and you're looking at that. And then to play, again, straight man to everybody else in the town of Mayberry. But it says something that he created this town, this legend, this image. And I've always said it, if you grew up in a city environment, if you did not have grandma and grandpa or something, you did not come from this, and you have no connection to rural America or the Midwest or the South or anything like that, you have Mayberry. So when you want to go home, you have Mayberry. That is something I think that was a wonderful gift that he has given to everybody, because those who don't have it now, thanks to him.
You put the fishing pole in the fishing hole.
Yes.
You can enjoy Tony Figueroa's standalone podcast this week in TV history, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find podcasts. We'll be back with more TV Confidential right after this.